All right, so let's do a rapid round robin on predictions for 2026. And Shanti, I'll give you the first word here.
See another big jump in video in the multimedia creation. So video creation had a big jump when VO3 came out. I think we're going to see another one of those. And that next big jump is going to be very problematic because creation's already really good. But
It's
you're
already
these
nuts.
yeah, but you're at these
Yeah.
small clips and you can do extension. It's a little cumbersome and clunky. It's going to get less clunky. You're going to be able to have multiple people just give it dialogue and have everything generated in single pass. And that's going to make it really easy. It's going to lower the barrier to entry to create like deep fakes and other types of videos. But I think we're going to see that jump. And I think we're going to also see it on like audio creation with music. Like right now, Universal Music Group was suing Udio, suing Suno, because they're able to create new music based on similar artist sounds. So like Udio doesn't let people download their creations right now based on that. That's going to have another big jump where you're going to be able to really start cloning artists more directly and say, I want something that really has this sound and it's going to be very good, indistinguishable from what the original artist was able to produce. So I
I
think those
think
will
that
be big for next year.
one thing to look out for on that, which I don't really know what the implication is going to be, but I can feel it in myself already. And I think a lot of other people are there, is content exhaustion.
Mhm.
Yes.
And like I was, you know, one of the actually amazing things we haven't talked that much about, out of all this Google stuff that came out is this nano banana. I fed it this JSON of all this data around the data set we were looking for. And I said, create an infographic of this. And holy cow, it presented every number back accurately. It did good, put together a really compelling visualization for it. It did all this other sort of stuff. And I've seen already a bunch of other amazing infographic type stuff floating around as that thing came out. But, the joke I had with someone on that was like, man, by New Year's, no one's ever going to want to see an infographic again in their life. You know what I mean? Like, and think about the same thing with, this videos and everything like that. I think and even today, it's so easy for us to create documents today. The challenge is actually consuming them and at a level where you're actually absorbing and learning. And I think that's going to be one of the more interesting things to me to see play out as we go through next year, is like, as content becomes so easy to create, what does this content exhaustion mean? And
especially
what do we start
especially
to value? I think we're going to value
yeah,
different things.
Yeah.
especially in a company that's very AI first, where everybody's doing it. So it's one thing when you have a small subset and it's like, wow, this dude's really
Yeah.
productive in his content creation. But when you have the whole company doing it, that notion of content exhaustion seems very, very real. I do think, as we go into next year, I think a lot more emphasis is going to be placed on, I don't know what you call it, but this enterprise intelligence, where you're taking advantage of the primitive, getting smarter and smarter. But really the emphasis is how do I really get these integrated into my ecosystem? What's the right mental model to think about these agents as they become more sophisticated? Do we start to talk about them like they're interns, junior analysts? And do we even start to think about, gain share outcomes? If you're, let's say, a consulting company and you build an agent for a kind of a base salary and that's what you get in return. But then if it achieves certain outcomes, it gets bonuses, right? And so I just think there's a huge kind of, the business model hasn't caught up to the LLM advances.
Yeah.
And I think 2026 might be the year that starts to happen.
Well, I think enterprise IT is going to have a reckoning because they're used to these huge, long timelines for everything they create. And businesses aren't going to put up with that anymore. They're like, we
Right.
know it only takes weeks to have a prototype out. I expect to see a prototype out and then tested and then refined and then in production in months now. Like,
Yeah.
why are we waiting when we
Yes.
can do this so rapidly?
The business people are going to start vibe coding these things. They're just going to say, all right, well, fine. I have access to all these tools. I'll just start building some stuff. I think you're going to see a proliferation of apps. It's sort of like, Stu, you were talking about, you're going to get sick of infographics. You're going to get sick of seeing apps bubble up all over the place. Most of which are pretty insecure and pretty lousy from a technical architect perspective, but they're going to get out there and the business is going to use it to move the ball. I predict that A, you'll see that. B, you'll see a lot more of the, bad guys use model X to do a bad thing, or used app Y to do a bad thing, and then you're going to see. I think you're going to see this polarization almost first, Dante, where the IT guys are like, "Oh, we gotta strap this stuff down. There's all this bad stuff happening," and the business are going to, sort of pull in the other direction. But I think the reckoning ultimately ends up where, and I keep thinking about Andre Karpathy's video that he did with Markesh the other day. And people are like, "Oh, he's saying, this AI is in a bubble." And what he's really saying is, no, it's going to take 10 years to build all these agents that can do these things. And I think the IT organization finally wakes up and says, "Oh, there's not an easy button. I have to do all the hard work and heavy lifting to provide the context to actually facilitate these agents to accomplish these goals and sort of automate these workflows." And I think finally it sort of becomes, okay, there is hard work to be done. We're going to re-engineer. It's almost like business process re-engineering comes back from the past to sort of link up with what AI can do to really start to deliver some legitimate business results.
Yeah, and data quality and data governance start becoming really important. When you look at, hey, they spend more on pre-training. Well, what does that mean? It means that they went trying to create better data quality so you could train a better model.
Yeah.
You need to think about that.
Yeah, look, data is still stuck in silos, the same as it ever was, right? So I think that becomes a huge, obvious bottleneck. But I also think you'll start to see a lot more creativity around how do I leverage AI to help solve that problem.
For sure.
I want to go back to one of the things Andy said a couple of minutes ago, because it kind of comes back to one of my predictions, which is I think one of the most interesting things to keep watching is how long can these AIs work autonomously? And that has been relatively short bursts of time, right? Like minutes, maybe you're starting to get to like an hour or two in extreme cases now where they can work autonomously. If the current trends continue, by the end of next year, you're getting into more like, well, they can work autonomously probably longer than a lot of your employees, right? Like how long can most employees really work autonomously before, asking their boss for something or getting some feedback or things along those lines, right?
Pete makes this work
A
14
day,
hours.
right? So I think you could get to that point if the trends continue where the amount of time that an agent can work autonomously is much longer. And the way that you give that agent tasks, assuming it has the right scaffolding, which I know we keep talking about needing those right layers on the scaffolding, but assuming it has that right scaffolding, the way you give it a task becomes more like you give humans a task, right? Like the equivalent of sending them a Slack message or an email and, saying, I need you to do this and pick this up and call me if you have any questions and do this. And so as that happens, going a little bit back to what Andy said a minute ago, you have to start thinking about the model. The economic model becomes very different, right? Like you start thinking about this less as, historically software is thought about as a tool that gives an amplifier to an employee, right? It's kind of like, oh, okay, if I use this tool, it's going to save me an hour a week and whatever. I make $90 an hour. So, that's worth, $5,000 over a year or whatever, when you get it into this type of workflow, no, I can work autonomously for a long time. You give it tasks the way I'm giving my other employees, things like that. It becomes much more like like an agent as an employee. And then that's where, Andy started talking about, well, do you start to give bonuses based on performance? Do you start to give, right? Like, well, how do you treat your employees, so I mean there's really a lot of interesting implications, I think, as you reach that point to where agents work a long time autonomously to the extent that they are just team members, like some other team members.
And in that world, that scaffolding we're talking about becomes even more important around the evaluation of what the agent's actually doing and making sure it's not running off the rails as it goes for 6 hours. And how do you give it feedback so it continues to learn? So I love that point, and I think it just pushes even harder on that scaffolding point.